The High Court backs the dad who took his daughter to Disney World in term time. John Platt refused to pay a fine, saying the girl had a good attendance record. Ministers say they will tighten the law, but for now, he's happy.
If you think that your kid's attendance is really good at school and you want to take them on a family holiday, the High Court has said absolutely clearly today it's not a criminal offence.
If families were to take different weeks at all different times, you'd get a real disruption to the group.
Also tonight, the IMF boss says Britain leaving the EU could be very, very bad and threaten recession.
An unexploded World War II bomb in Bath. Homes cleared, hundreds evacuated.
And meningitis took his hands and feet. Spurs made Marshall Jansen's dreams come true.
This is the ITV Evening News with Alistair Stewart and Charlene White.
Good evening. A dad, a Disney holiday and the High Court have challenged the legal obligation of every child in England to attend school regularly. John Platt said his daughter's 90% attendance record was regular and refused a fine for taking her on holiday in term time. The judges backed him.
Isle of Wight Council, who'd fined Mr Platt £60, then doubled it, said the ruling created massive uncertainty. Ministers believe every day missed can affect a child's chance of getting good GCSEs. They've now pledged to change the law to close the loophole. Our consumer editor Chris Choi reports.
A dad that fought the school fine system and won.
The best part about going to Walt Disney World.
This was a destination for a term-time trip with his daughter. That led to a £60 penalty. By ruling in his favour, the High Court today effectively ended a blanket ban on holidays in school time.
Parents have just been paying the £60 fine and factoring it into the cost of the holiday, and there's something really obscene. It's almost like extortion.
But does this mean that parents can now pretty much ignore that rule? They can start booking term time holidays?
If you think that your kid's attendance is really good at school and you want to take them on a family holiday, the High Court has said absolutely clearly today it's not a criminal offence.
More than 50,000 of the school attendance fines were issued last year. A typical family package holiday to Spain can go from £2,300 in term time to £4,700 during the school break. This could mean cheaper holidays for millions, but only children with otherwise excellent attendance records are covered by the ruling. The Department for Education withdrew from our arranged interview today, but suggested we talk to this head teacher in Manchester.
A week in itself, will have an impact, but then if families were to take different weeks at all different times, you'd get a real disruption to the group and the classes as they were learning and trying to make progress.
Around school gates tonight, confusion about a ruling designed to bring clarity.
It's so much cheaper to take holidays out of, holiday time that it is worrying. If it suddenly looks like that's not an absolute rule, I don't know quite what we're supposed to do with that information.
If the child went in the middle of the term for about, let's say, a week, I'll say that's probably a bit extreme.
I would obviously love to take my children out of school and take them to Canada at a time when I could afford it. But I also wouldn't want them to miss out on lessons, and I wouldn't want to upset the school, so it's very confusing.
Local councils now fear a breakdown of school guidelines, sparking a holiday free-for-all. There are demands for new legislation. With official policy in tatters tonight, one dad's holiday with his daughter here is causing fireworks at the Department for Education.
The last woman to speak said confusion. You said confusion.
Yeah.
What does it mean for parents tonight?
Big question. I mean, it is incredible, isn't it, that it's taken so long and so much money to go through the courts. It was meant to achieve clarity, but there is still that body of confusion. Simply put, if your child has a good attendance record, then a one-off week of unauthorised term time absence should not result in a fine. But remember the limits of this. It's only state schools, it's only England. And when they talk about good attendance in court today, they're talking about in the region of 93%. That's the region we're talking about here. And anyway, all this might very quickly change. The Department for Education, as we said, wouldn't do an interview this afternoon. They have sent a statement. They say, in their view, attendance is non-negotiable. They say they will consider new laws and new guidelines to schools, aiming, I suspect, to grab back any parent power that has been handed over through this ruling.
Chris, thank you.
Britain quitting the EU would be anything from pretty bad to very, very bad. That's according to the head of the International Monetary Union. Christine Lagarde warned a vote to leave would be bad for the UK economy and see interest rates rise sharply. Leave campaigners said she was wrong and questioned the group's independence. As our political correspondent Libby Vina reports, it's the latest in a string of controversial interventions.
And the United Kingdom is at its best when it's helping to lead a strong Europe.
A vote to leave the European Union could have material economic effects.
After the US President and the Bank of England Governor, would Christine Lagarde of the IMF be quite as gloomy about Britain leaving the EU? Well, yes, her prediction, a short-term shock and a long-term slowdown.
What will be the world after? Will it be a la Norway? Will it be a la Switzerland? Or will it be a la WTO? And depending on what hypotheticals you take, it's going to be pretty bad to very, very bad. So that's what we see.
The IMF warns the UK economy could shrink by between 1.5% and 9.5%. That would wipe out any savings made by not contributing to the EU budget. And there's likely to be a housing and stock market crash. But will people listen to warnings from a body like the IMF?
A lot of the Euroscepticism in this country is scepticism about international bodies, in particular, obviously, the European Commission. Aren't you at all worried that your very negative assessment of what might happen could be entirely counterproductive, that you're actually playing into the hands of the Brexiteers?
If it is, then so be it. We're just doing our job, and we have a mission. It's sometimes called tough love, which is to actually say things as we see them, comment on the facts and figures as we assess and verify them. And that's what we have to do, whichever way it goes.
For this former Chancellor, though, the warnings are unconvincing.
Not so long ago, George Osborne was berating them for being far too pessimistic about the British economy. Now he's egging them on.
So you think they have got this entirely wrong?
I think the suggestion of a massive decline in GDP, I think, has no basis in fact.
But Christine Lagarde says there is a big risk to Britain's economy, and it's her duty to point that out.
What she described as tough love, vote leave campaigners today dismissed as interfering in the democratic process. But if they were unhappy with her comments, they better prepare themselves for June, when the IMF publishes its full report, spelling out in detail just how perilous they believe Britain leaving the EU really would be.
Libby, thank you.
A father accused of murdering his 6-year-old daughter has told a court he was devastated when she was taken into care, aged just a few weeks old. Ben Butler was convicted of assaulting Ellie, but that was later quashed. Giving evidence for the first time, he told a jury he wasn't given a fair trial. Richard Pallow has more.
Ellie Butler spent much of her short life in foster care, separated from her parents. Today we heard from the man accused of killing her in a rage, her father Ben. The 6-year-old was found dead with extensive skull fractures in October 2013 at the family house in Sutton. Butler and his partner, Jenny Gray, Ellie's mother, claim it was a tragic accident.
It's not good, don't ask me to do something, which you ain't.
The court had already seen mobile phone footage of Butler swearing in front of his daughter, her leg in a bandage. Now, on the first day giving evidence, the defendant often got frustrated when questioned by his own barrister, and then snapped when talking to the judge. He told the court he felt like he was having an unfair trial, saying the experts were completely biased and in many respects corrupt. Mr. Justice Wilkie warned him he was getting into difficult territory, to which the defendant replied, "I'm not going to be muzzled, it's how I feel." The judge said, "No one is wanting to muzzle this witness. Sounds like you are," was Butler's response. Ben Butler brought Ellie, aged just 7 weeks, to this Surrey hospital after he claims that he found her floppy and lifeless. But one of the doctors told him that the only way she could have sustained such injuries was if she had been violently shaken. That was in February 2007. But after Ellie was made the subject of an interim care order, it was not until November 2012 that she returned to live with her parents. Less than a year later, she was dead. As a father, he says he was devastated when Ellie was taken into care. His subsequent conviction for shaking her was quashed. Butler denies murdering his daughter. Richard Pallow, ITV News.
The South Yorkshire police officer in charge of the investigation into the disappearance of Ben Needham will remain in his post. Detective Superintendent Matt Fennec was recalled from the island of Kos after allegations of an 8-hour drinking session. The force says their decision is in line with the wishes of Ben's family.
Talks between junior doctors' representatives and the government will continue into next week. The two sides have been negotiating for 5 days over controversial new contracts, which have seen medics hold a series of strikes. Well, our political correspondent Lewis Vaughan-Jones is outside the British Medical Association for us. So, Lewis, why have they moved this deadline?
Well, Charlene, I suppose the simple answer is the delay is because they still haven't reached an agreement. That's despite a week now of what has been described as intensive talks. It's despite the fact that this whole process actually started years ago, and despite the fact that both sides agree on 90% of the details. But it is that one issue of Saturday pay, how much doctors should be paid for working on a Saturday. Now, this latest round of talks has been organised by an independent body, ACAS. Earlier, they gave us this update.
In my judgment, some real progress has been made to address outstanding issues. I reached the view, however, in the past 24 hours that a limited amount of additional time would be needed to give the process a chance of reaching a successful conclusion.
So Brendan Barber sounding pretty positive there, and it's worth reminding you that as things stand, the threat of the government imposing this contract is on hold, and on the other side, the threat of the doctors going on strike again is on hold until this process finishes. Now, we have obviously already seen several strikes by junior doctors, but they are due to start talks again 9 a.m. Monday morning, and they should, I say should, be wrapped up by Wednesday.
All right, Lewis, thank you.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, the latest from Bath, where experts are attempting to make safe a massive unexploded bomb.
And preserved forever, the crumbling graffiti drawn by conscientious objectors to the First World War. All those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. The EU's naval operation to stop people smugglers in the Mediterranean is failing, so says the House of Lords. And worse, it may be putting refugees' lives at greater risk. Since last year, Operation Sophia has targeted the route from Libya into Italy. Almost 14,000 refugees have been rescued, 114 boats seized, and 69 suspected traffickers arrested. 5 warships are currently involved, including HMS Enterprise from Britain. But as Paul Davis reports, a Lords committee says it isn't disrupting the smugglers, neither at sea nor on the shore.
There is, it seems, no stopping the flow of desperate people into Europe. These the latest arrivals. Syrians picked up from a flimsy boat that had been drifting for days. The Italian Coast Guard ship that rescued them docking in Sicily early today. Last year, the European Union launched Operation Sophia, countries including Britain deploying a naval force to crack down on the people smugglers who provide these boats and make a fortune from the desperation of others. 11 months on, Operation Sophia has been branded a failure. Instead of crushing the traffickers, the warships just complete their jobs, pulling refugees from the water and delivering them to the European mainland.
9,000 people are alive who would otherwise be dead, and that is a considerable success. For the moment, it is saving lives, but it is not stopping the smugglers.
The main reason for that is that warships like the Royal Navy's HMS Richmond can only patrol outside Libya's territorial waters where the people smugglers operate. And charities say Operation Sophia was always doomed anyway, because it fails to address the desperate conditions in countries like Syria that people will risk everything to escape.
The smugglers are there because people are using them to flee for their lives. They're fleeing from danger, they're fleeing from conflict, violence and destitution.
Ironically, the House of Lords report says by destroying some of the smugglers' wooden boats, Operation Sophia has increased the risk, as they're being replaced by cheaper, unstable, inflatable dinghies that are much more prone to sink. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Hundreds of residents in Bath face a second night out of their homes after a £500 World War II bomb was discovered. Builders found it under a former school yesterday afternoon. Bomb disposal experts have set up a 300-metre exclusion zone. From the scene, Karen Bell.
Tons of sand, the best hope of protection if the £500 bomb were to explode. It's the neighbour that no one knew about. Builders found the bomb yesterday afternoon. 1,000 homes were evacuated and 20 roads closed. Some residents choosing to spend last night at Bath Racecourse.
We just got what we're standing up in, so we had no idea how long we'd be away from home.
It's dangerous, it's in a highly built up area. It's necessary to deal with it.
This World War II bomb has lain under this former school site for more than 70 years. It's one of many which rained down on Bath one weekend in 1942. 400 people were killed in the Bath Blitz and scores of buildings destroyed. That history suddenly resurfaced and police weren't taking any chances.
Every now and again these devices do come to the surface, and when they do, I think people understand that we have to deal with the issues, the exclusion zones that then come with that, and the safety that we have to put first and foremost for everyone involved.
The bomb is one of the largest to fall on Bath. The challenge, to get it safely out and safely detonated. Well, right now they are defusing the bomb, and the police on the cordons here have been approached by residents all afternoon wanting to know when they can get past. And the police are saying to them, look, we are at the most dangerous stage of this operation. But if all goes well, the plan is to move the bomb off-site tonight, and then hopefully all those residents can head home.
Karen, thank you.
And from one wartime reminder to another. Art and graffiti drawn on prison cells by soldiers who refused to fight in the First World War will be preserved thanks to a new lottery grant.
The pencil drawings, poems and hymns were made by a group of conscientious objectors imprisoned for their views in Richmond Castle, Yorkshire. Duncan Golostani reports on the work to remember those who spoke out.
Is England a free country? Well, let us go. Let the MPs fight it out. Let's be free and look after our wives and children.
You might just as well try to dry a floor by throwing water on it as try to end this war by fighting.
They were the voices of dissent few wanted to hear. Locked up in Richmond Castle, some of the earliest conscientious objectors. When conscription was introduced during the First World War, they refused to fight. Some objected to doing anything which might contribute to the war effort.
Quite an emotional experience, really.
Among a group known as the Richmond 16, the father-in-law of Marjorie Gordy. Norman Gordy was a Quaker prepared to die for his beliefs. On the wall of his cell, there is still a drawing of his mother. At the end of May 1916, the men were taken from their cells here and sent to France. That meant they were on active service, and if they disobeyed orders there, they could be shot. Some in the army were determined to make an example of them. At the last minute, the Richmond 16 was saved thanks to Prime Minister Herbert Asquith. But back home, the men were ostracised and struggled to find work.
I suppose, really, in a way, it makes me feel quite proud to think that he took that stand so long ago, and here we are today, remembering it.
The men's graffiti will now be preserved by English Heritage, a permanent record to those who helped shift public opinion by fighting for their beliefs. Duncan Golostani, ITV News, North Yorkshire.
The world's oldest person has died at the age of 116. Susana Mashhad Jones, seen here at her birthday celebrations last year, was the granddaughter of slaves and lived through the reign of 20 US presidents. She was born in Alabama and attributed her long life to eating 4 rashers of bacon with scrambled eggs every day.
Finally tonight, the remarkable 8-year-old whose bravery has captured the hearts of Spurs fans and players. Marshall Jansen had his hands and legs amputated after narrowly surviving meningitis.
But he refused to let that stop his dream of playing with his Premier League idols. He was invited onto the pitch last weekend for a kickabout with the team, and today told Sejal Carrier all about it.
Give it up for Marshall Jansen. Come on, Marshall.
In the face of overwhelming odds, Marshall Jansen is showing extraordinary resilience.
And his dad, Moss.
A little boy who thought he may never walk again made giant strides onto the pitch of his footballing idols, Tottenham.
How would you fancy joining Musa for a little kick around on the pitch?
That'd be awesome. And so to a cheering crowd, some reduced to tears, Marshall's dream to kick a ball about with his heroes came true. Today it was a kickabout in the park with Dad Moss and sister Lexi, where he told me his prosthetic legs have made all the difference.
Because you couldn't play football very well before, could you, before you had your legs? And how did that make you feel?
Sad.
And now?
Happy. Marshall was only a year old when he contracted meningitis, nearly losing his life twice. The only way to save him was to amputate his hands and legs. His mum told me at first he was worried people would laugh at him playing football.
He just decided, I'm not wearing them, everyone's going to laugh at me. And that's like, broke my heart because he's always been so confident. Since all this has happened, he's wearing his legs to school every day. On the turn, shoot! As he grows, Marshall will need new prosthetic legs every year at a total cost of almost £1 million. So his mum has begun a fundraising campaign, buoyed by her son's determination and courage. Sejal Carrier, ITV News.
Tottenham Hotspur Football Club champions. That's all for now. Julie Etchingham will be here with news at 10.
Absolutely, but from everyone here on the team, have a very good evening. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.